The Queen Consort had a room no one was supposed to know about. Not the staff, not the family, not even the guards sworn to protect every corner of Windsor Castle. But when the royal guard spotted something that didn't belong, tucked behind an abandoned corridor that wasn't on any official map, he didn't log it. He didn't ask permission. He forced the door open himself. What he found inside wasn't forgotten. It wasn't accidental. It was hidden on purpose. Now, before we show you exactly what was buried behind that locked door, and the moment a prince realized his grandmother had been kept in the dark, hit subscribe with the bell turned on and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because this story didn't end with protocol. It ended with a secret room and the truth no one was supposed to find. Windsor Castle moved differently after dusk. The tourists were long gone, the courtyard silent, the scent of aged stone lingering in the air like something you couldn't quite name but recognised anyway. Within the outer perimeter, the guards shifted into their overnight rotations, quieter now, more watchful, but no less precise. Sergeant Rhys Calder stood beneath a second-floor archway overlooking the inner gardens, his gloved hand resting on the brass end of his halberd. 38 years old, Scots Guards, 12 years in ceremonial duty, 6 before that in Helmand Province. He wasn't the youngest soldier in the rotation, but he was the one they listened to when something felt wrong. And tonight, something did. It wasn't noise, it was the absence of it. Across the opposite wing, just past the South Library, was a hallway he'd walked 100 times. One door led to a utility closet. Another, supposedly, to an unused storage corridor blocked off after the Queen Mother's passing. Except it wasn't unused. Not entirely. From where he stood, Rhys could see the faintest sliver of light seeping beneath the gap. Not the steady amber glow of heritage bulbs, but cool, clinical LED. White light. Modern. Temporary. He tilted his head slightly, adjusting his angle. No motion, no staff entered, no official access logged, and yet it was lit. He scanned the shadowed perimeter. Everything else looked routine. The guardhouse logs had shown no deviations, but this wasn't a deviation, it was an absence. The kind that made instinct itch beneath the surface. Rhys shifted his stance, stepping slightly back into the shadow of the column. His boots made no sound. Behind him, the muffled rhythm of another guard's route passed into the distance. He'd been at Windsor long enough to learn the building's moods, where the walls whispered, where the floors creaked, which doors stuck on rainy days. And that corridor? It never had a reason to be lit. It wasn't on his rotation. It wasn't on anyone's. He'd asked once, years ago. Storage, they'd told him. Just keep your post. Another guard had leaned in back then, whispering low, "They say the old Queen never stepped foot past that wing." Said it wasn't meant to be opened again. Rhys hadn't thought much of it at the time, but war teaches you to read silence like a language, and this silence wasn't peace. It was concealment. He didn't move, didn't speak into his comms. He simply adjusted his grip on the halberd and filed it away behind the calm stillness of his face. A door lit without access. A wing with no listed function. No staff in or out. Too quiet, he thought, is still something. He didn't know it yet, but that hallway wouldn't stay quiet much longer. Not once he opened the door. Rhys Calder didn't sleep much that night. But then again, the best soldiers rarely did. Not when the day left questions hanging. And that corridor had left too many. By morning he was back at Windsor before the sun cleared the horizon. The castle's rhythm was already in motion. Groundskeepers raking gravel smooth, kitchen staff wheeling steel carts through side halls, footmen speaking in murmurs behind panelled doors. Rhys stayed silent, his focus narrowed. He made his way to the systems terminal, tucked in the administrative alcove near the South Library, a touchscreen display mounted beside the stairwell, typically used for patrol assignments and maintenance logs. His fingers moved with practiced ease across the interface. First he searched the master floor plan. The corridor he'd seen the night before was labelled Service Wing C, according to old blueprints. It should have led to linen storage and backup maintenance piping. But the overlay logs told a different story. No service records in 3 years. No cleaning staff listed on rotation. No heating, plumbing, or refurbishment logs since 2019. Yet the lighting, the paint, the smell he'd noticed, all recent, meticulously maintained, off book. He switched to delivery manifests, looking for crate movements and scheduled drop-offs. That's when the pattern appeared. 5 deliveries over the past 2 months. None listed for Service Wing C, but a note appeared beside each, redirected to holding, admin, via courier discretion. He narrowed his eyes. Courier discretion? No department would sign off with a phrase like that. Logistics required tracking, especially at Windsor. Nothing went unnoted unless someone wanted it that way. He stepped back from the screen and watched the hall. Minutes later, a cleaning crew rolled past with a low trolley stacked with wooden crates wrapped in white cloth. Each was marked Private Archive Transfer. The tag was laminated, perfectly aligned. But the staffer pushing the cart wasn't Royal Archive. Wrong uniform, wrong badge. Reese followed at a distance. Just before reaching the main archway, the staffer slowed, checked behind him, then veered off, pushing the cart down a narrow hall between 2 portrait-lined walls, straight towards Service Wing C. Reese stayed out of view, shadowing through parallel walkways until he reached the edge of the wall, just in time to hear the faint click of a key entering a lock. The sound of hinges turning. Then silence. The staffer never came back out. A minute passed, then another. Reese finally stepped around the corner. The hallway was empty, door shut. Crates gone. He stood there, face unreadable, letting the silence settle around him. He didn't knock, didn't touch the handle. Not yet. Instead, he turned and walked away, slow and steady, eyes distant. In Kandahar, they used to call it the silence trick, making the compound look abandoned, so no one would check what was really being stored inside. And the ones who did? They were the first to go missing. As he rounded the corridor back into public view, a single thought surfaced beneath the calm exterior. I have to see what I'm supposedly not supposed to protect. The clock in the East Wing struck midnight, a low, metallic chime that echoed through the corridors like a heartbeat, measured, ancient, uncaring. Sergeant Reese Calder waited in silence 1 level below, tucked into the shadows of the stone archway that overlooked Service Wing C. Patrol rotations had shifted. The night crew had checked in. No one would be doubling back for another 30 minutes. He moved. Every step was controlled. Every motion rehearsed from years of nighttime movements in places far less forgiving than Windsor Castle. The first door opened with little resistance. He'd wedged a small shim beneath the edge earlier in the evening, careful not to trigger any latch sensors. It gave way with a soft click. He slipped inside and shut it behind him. The corridor beyond was colder than he expected. The floor had been freshly waxed. Overhead, soft white LEDs buzzed faintly. Modern panels set into a ceiling built 2 centuries before they were imagined. Reese took it in slowly. The air smelled faintly of varnish and old wood, but too sterile, too perfect. No cobwebs, no dust, not even a scuff on the skirting boards. This wasn't unused. This was preserved. He kept low, hugging the wall, past framed portraits that didn't match any he'd seen catalogued. A bust of Queen Victoria stared down at him from a marble pedestal, but the plaque beneath had no text. Just a gold seal. Wrong texture, wrong curvature. A fake. His boots landed soft, silent. At the far end of the corridor, beneath a brass wall sconce, stood the second door. He stopped. Unlike the first, this one wasn't old. It was new. The steel frame had been painted to match the surrounding limestone, but the sharp edges betrayed it. Clean cut, machine pressed. There was no crest above the threshold, no name, no lock slot. Just a single digital keypad, half recessed into the wood-grain panel. Reese stepped closer. No markings, no fingerprint smudges, not even the residual dust of infrequent use. It had been cleaned recently, maybe earlier that day. He reached out slowly with one gloved hand, fingers brushing the edges of the frame. Cold. Seamless. This wasn't a utility closet. It wasn't a linen room. It was something else entirely. Something buried. He'd seen one like it before, in a NATO facility carved into a mountain in Helmand. Back then, it had taken 3 authorizations to open, and it hadn't led to a closet. It had led to the one place no one was supposed to look. He inhaled once, slow and deep, then reached into the slot along his belt and pulled out the halberd shaft. Ceremonial, yes, but solid steel reinforced through the neck. He wedged it into the side seam of the panel, braced his boot at the base, gritted his teeth, and whispered, barely loud enough for the corridor to hear, "So what are you hiding?" Then he pushed. The shaft hadn't moved much. Rhys had applied just enough pressure to feel the resistance. The door wasn't going to open easily, not without tripping something, but he hadn't come to force it. Not yet. He needed to know how much resistance he'd be up against. Now he did. He stepped back, eyes scanning the walls again. No cameras. At least none visible. Just panelling too pristine for a place supposedly forgotten. The corridor was sterile, hushed, frozen in an artificial kind of stillness. Until it wasn't. The voice came sharp, feminine, measured in tone, but sharp enough to cut glass. "I should have known it would be you." Rhys didn't turn immediately. He already recognized it. Camilla. Her heels struck the floor behind him with purposeful rhythm, flanked by 2 aides in charcoal grey suits, men who looked uncomfortable in their own silence. "You've made a habit," she said, stepping closer, "of going places you don't belong." He finally turned. The Queen Consort stood at the corridor's threshold, her expression perfectly manicured, hair pulled back, lips painted in a restrained plum. But it was her eyes, cold, calculating, that gave her away. "I could have you dismissed by sunrise," she said. "You're trespassing on a sealed corridor with no clearance and no invitation." Rhys didn't blink. "With respect, ma'am, this wing isn't listed in the household registry. There's no maintenance log, no access key, not even a designation." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And?" "That's a security threat." Camilla's brow lifted. "A security threat? Do you think this is Afghanistan, Sergeant Calder? Do you believe you're guarding against insurgents in the tapestries?" Rhys kept his voice level. "I believe if a guard is sworn to protect the crown, he should know what's behind its doors." Camilla's tone turned sharp. "Your job is ceremonial." He took one step toward her. Just one. "And yet here you are, scared of the man in the bearskin hat." That cut through. One of the aides shifted uneasily behind her. Camilla's gaze narrowed. "You're being insolent." "I'm being vigilant. You're being reckless. I'm being what the late Queen expected me to be." That was the line. The one that made her flinch. Not with fear, but with something colder. Contempt. She stepped forward until only a few feet separated them. "You think because you stood still through a few parades and held your posture in Helmand that you've earned the right to question how this family operates?" Rhys said nothing. Camilla leaned in, voice low now. "You're a man in a red jacket. An ornament. Nothing more." Rhys's jaw didn't move, but his eyes never left hers. "Then why lock an ornament out?" That landed. Her expression faltered. She turned sharply. "You'll regret this." "I already would," he said, "if I walked away." Camilla didn't respond. She stormed back down the corridor, her aides scrambling to follow. But her reaction, sharp, defensive, miscalculated, told Rhys everything he needed to know. There was something behind that door she didn't want found. And now he wouldn't rest until he did. The castle slept heavier the next night. Rain tapped faintly against the stained glass windows as wind moved through the upper battlements, like breath through an old throat. Most of Windsor's staff had retired early. An electrical issue in the east wing had pulled engineers off the rota and left the lower halls eerily quiet. Rhys waited until just after 2, not a second earlier. He moved alone, cloak folded over one arm to muffle the ceremonial halberd clutched tight against his side. No comms, no backup, no orders. Just a man who had learned to trust instinct more than rank. The first door opened easier this time. No shim required. no hesitation. He stepped into the corridor and froze. The air had changed. It was colder, drier. A faint hum reverberated from deeper in, the unmistakable murmur of a climate control unit. Archival grade. He'd heard one like it once before, deep inside the British Museum's private vaults. The kind that only turned on when something precious or irreplaceable was being stored. His boots touched down soft on the polished stone. The walls gleamed with fresh wax. But now a second change. The portraits were gone. Where he'd seen faceless frames and unlabelled busts the night before, the walls were now bare, as if someone had rushed to remove identifiers, erasing even the hint of history behind that corridor. He reached the second door again. Steel frame, no crest, no number. This time he didn't hesitate. He drove the halberd's shaft into the edge with a sharp crack, wedging the seam wide enough to grip. With his boot braced low, he heaved once, twice, and on the third push, the latch gave. A hiss of air escaped like the breath of something locked away too long. The door swung open. Rhys stepped inside. The room beyond was long, rectangular, dimly lit by recessed strip lights built into the walls. The floors were bare concrete, poured over something older. The walls were lined with glass display cabinets, some sealed, some left half open. Along the far wall stood a single throne-like chair, high-backed and upholstered in crushed blue velvet. But it wasn't Elizabeth's crest stitched into the cloth, it was Camilla's. Flanked by two new banners bearing a reworked sigil, still regal but modernized, stripped of the familiar. A lion without its crown. Rhys moved slowly down the central aisle. To his left, sealed velvet boxes marked with faded gold letters. Jewellery cases, insignia pouches, rolled silks labelled with codes he recognised from state storage inventories. To his right, frames of handwritten letters, Queen Elizabeth's unmistakable cursive. But none were labelled, none preserved properly. And in the centre of the room, mounted on a glass pedestal like a museum exhibit, sat something that stopped him cold. A coronation programme, June 2nd, 1953, original print. But it had been altered. The cover photograph of young Elizabeth in her robes had been carefully removed, the paper trimmed and replaced with a newer image. Camilla, in similar regalia, digitally imposed over the original Westminster backdrop. The craftsmanship was flawless. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd think it was always meant to be that way. Rhys stared at it for a long moment before moving toward the throne. It wasn't just staged, it was curated. A private chamber meant for no one to see, not the public, not the palace, not even the family. This wasn't tribute, this was rehearsal. And every inch of it screamed one word: replacement. Rhys's breath fogged faintly in the temperature-controlled air. He stood still, scanning the room, not like a soldier, but like a man standing at the edge of something sacred, or desecrated. The drawers beneath the long display cabinet weren't locked. They slid open with a smooth, oiled quiet. The first held stacks of letters, ribbon-tied in faded blue silk. They weren't replicas. The ink had faded where folds met paper. The crests pressed into wax were original, no two impressions identical. He picked up the topmost stack. At first glance they were benign, formal correspondence, likely between Queen Elizabeth and various heads of state. But then his fingers stilled. One envelope bore her signature, but beneath it a second set of handwriting bled into the margins, sharper, heavier ink, notes scribbled between the lines. Rhys brought it closer to the light. Entire phrases had been crossed out, rewritten in newer strokes. Words like duty and public faith replaced with modern unity and contemporary realignment. He checked the bottom corner, dated October 2021. A postscript had been added, one that clearly wasn't Elizabeth's hand. He knew that script. He'd seen it on garden invitations, on palace notices, on media briefings. Camilla's. He opened the next drawer, press release templates. Draft statements marked not for official use. Bullet points discussing public perception shifts. Queen Elizabeth's over-identification with past monarchic structure, and Her Majesty's legacy in need of modernisation. Another folder held staged photographs, shots of rooms at Windsor, Kensington and Sandringham, except something was off. Rhys leaned in. The framed portraits in the photos had been digitally altered, Queen Elizabeth's presence minimised. In one, her image was entirely removed and replaced by a photo of Charles and Camilla standing before a recreated throne backdrop. In another, her coronation portrait was missing entirely. He opened a bound folder, Legacy Consolidation Plan, Internal Use Only. His eyes flicked across the headers. Phase 1, Controlled Media Narrative, complete. Phase 2, Archive Reorganization, underway. Phase 3, Visual Transition of Symbolic Identity, pending William's accession. Beneath that, a timeline, dates mapped to specific events. The Queen's funeral marked as Transition Window, Accelerate Phase 2. Her Platinum Jubilee labelled Final Public Solidification, Begin Redirect Messaging. And at the bottom, a handwritten note in the same sharp script he'd seen in the margins. The public mourns what they remember. We control what they remember. Rhys exhaled sharply. This wasn't archiving, it wasn't even tribute. It was a campaign, a behind-the-scenes operation to reshape the monarchy's memory. One press release, one photograph, one forged legacy at a time. He looked back to the throne chair. The sigil stitched above it glinted in the low light. No lion, no crown, just a single sceptre flanked by roses. Camilla's personal coat of arms, stylized to look centuries older than it was, a subtle erasure of a queen, and a quiet rehearsal of another. He whispered it under his breath, not as accusation, but as revelation. You're not preserving her, you're replacing her. The moment shattered like a dropped glass. Rhys didn't hear them approach, not until the voice tore through the stillness behind him. Step away from that cabinet. Now, Camilla. He turned. She stood framed in the open doorway, heels clicking fast behind her as she advanced into the chamber, flanked by two palace staffers. Her voice was louder than before, sharper, tinged with something bordering on panic. You've gone too far this time. This isn't guard duty, it's derangement. She pointed toward the open display where Queen Elizabeth's letters lay exposed beneath archival glass. You've defiled her space. This is treasonous behaviour. Do you understand what you've done? Rhys didn't flinch. He stood calmly by the desk, one hand resting on the edge of a drawer, still half open. I understand exactly what I've done. The two aides looked unsure, one of them visibly hesitating before stepping forward. Rhys reached into the drawer and pulled out a letter, carefully. Then he turned it around. I'd like someone to explain this. The silence that followed was taut, humming with tension. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Faster this time, louder. Then, his voice cutting through the noise like steel on stone. Who gave him clearance? Prince William entered the chamber with force behind each stride. He wasn't alone. A Royal Archives assistant followed close behind, confusion written across her face. Camilla, he said, not looking at her yet. What's going on here? She spun toward him like a cornered ambassador. This man has broken into a sealed wing. He's tampering with your grandmother's private collection. Rhys held up the letter. I haven't tampered with anything. I've uncovered edits. William paused. His eyes dropped to the page in Rhys's hand. Whose handwriting is that? Rhys passed the letter forward, wordlessly. William took it, eyes scanning the familiar script of his grandmother until it broke. The ink darkened mid-sentence. Different pen, different pressure, different voice entirely. The annotations twisted the meaning, turning a passage about public duty into one about symbolic transition. Words like steadfast replaced with evolving. William's jaw clenched. He swallowed hard. This isn't hers. These notes. She'd never have written this. Camilla stepped forward fast. You're letting a soldier in a red coat manipulate your perception. Look at him. He doesn't even belong in this room. William looked up at her, then slowly turned to Rhys. Where did you find this? Draw 4, Rees said simply. There are 27 more just like it. The assistant behind William moved forward, her eyes wide as she took in the room. Shelves of repurposed banners, half-concealed PR files, Queen Elizabeth's words overlaid with edits not her own. William stared at the throne chair. The crest stitched into the velvet, not the lion, not the crown, just Camilla's sceptre. He looked back at Rees, voice tight, almost hoarse. What else is in here? Rees didn't answer. He didn't need to, because William already knew. Whatever this room was meant to be, it wasn't meant to honour the Queen. Prince William didn't speak at first. He just stood in the centre of the room, letter still in hand, eyes moving across the banners, the drawers, the throne, and the silence, deep and furious, filled every corner. Camilla tried to reclaim it. It was never meant to be permanent. These were working materials, concepts, drafts. You know how transitions are managed behind closed doors. William didn't look at her. She stepped closer. William, your grandmother was a relic. She ruled in a different century. Her memory deserves preservation. Of course it does, but not as some immovable museum piece. We have to move forward. He turned slowly. His voice dropped to something brittle. You edited her words. She froze. It was to frame her more appropriately. In light of modern values. You rewrote her, he said. You stripped her language, recast her intentions, replaced her legacy with your own vocabulary. I refined it, Camilla snapped, the mask slipping. The monarchy must evolve. She resisted that. We all know it. Rees stood silent, watching. William stepped toward the desk, picked up a second letter, then a third. Each bore the same signature. Queen Elizabeth's seal intact, but her sentences twisted. He stopped at a photograph half tucked beneath a velvet cloth, pulled it free. It was from the Jubilee. His grandmother waving from the balcony, surrounded by family. Except in this version, she'd been digitally faded, lightened until she was barely visible. And in the foreground, sharpened and saturated, stood Camilla, smiling, central, alone. William's hand trembled as he set it down. You weren't just editing words. You were erasing her entirely. Camilla pushed forward again. You're overreacting. This was a draft chamber. Nothing from here was released, nothing public. But that's the problem, William said. His eyes shone now, not with rage, but with betrayal. You did it in secret. You buried her real voice. You tried to erase the only person who made this place feel sacred. Camilla faltered. Rees stepped in, finally. She didn't ask to be modernized. She asked to be remembered. William exhaled, shaky, like something inside him had cracked but hadn't yet fallen apart. He turned to the Royal Archives assistant. Get the inventory team. Now. This entire room gets sealed and catalogued. Every drawer, every box, every page. Camilla's voice jumped an octave. You're making a mistake. You're reacting like a boy, not a leader. William turned slowly to face her. His hands trembled at his sides, but his voice didn't. You took her memory, and you tried to twist it into yours, but you forgot something. She blinked, stiff. What? He nodded toward Rees. Some people still remember what truth looks like. Camilla's lips parted, but no words came. Behind her, the aides remained motionless. They'd seen enough. William stepped back, looked at Rees. You're to stay until the last piece is boxed. No one touches anything else. Not her letters, not her banners, not even the air in this room. Rees gave a nod. No salute. Just that single, silent agreement. Camilla stood alone now, surrounded by relics she couldn't control and silence she couldn't command. Her crest, her throne, her rehearsal was done. And for the first time in that room, Elizabeth's room, truth had returned. The chamber felt different now. Not colder, quieter. Not in the way it had before, when secrets clung to the walls like dust. This silence was weightier, honest, the kind that followed truth when it finally stepped into the room. Staff from the Royal Collection arrived within the hour, quiet men and women with soft gloves and lined cases. Rees oversaw each one, standing near the throne as item after item was catalogued. The Queen's letters were placed into acid-free sleeves. The PR folders were tagged. Photographs, edited and original, separated. The throne was last. Two curators hesitated before touching it, unsure if protocol allowed it. Rhys simply nodded. They removed the velvet cover embroidered with Camilla's crest and folded it inward without a word. At the far side of the room, Prince William stood in silence, arms crossed tightly over his chest. He hadn't spoken since issuing the order. His expression hadn't softened, and his eyes, red-rimmed now, never strayed far from the Queen's letters. Rhys walked over slowly, stopping beside him. For a moment neither of them said a thing. Then William spoke, quiet, flat. "She trusted us." Rhys nodded. "She did." William's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. "She left us with words." And someone still tried to rewrite them. "They failed," Rhys said simply. William finally turned to him. There wasn't a smile, there wasn't pride, just something deeper, gratitude buried beneath pain. "You honoured that." Rhys didn't reply. He didn't need to. He stepped back toward the door as the last case was sealed. The chamber had been emptied of performance, of pretense. What was left was not presentation. It was record. He passed by Camilla without speaking. She stood near the doorway, arms folded, back stiff. The room she once controlled now moved around her without acknowledgement. No staff deferred to her. No aid met her eye. Rhys didn't look at her as he exited. He didn't break pace. But the quiet lingered behind him like a verdict. The corridor beyond was empty. No guards, no noise. Just the long, polished floor stretching back toward Windsor's known wings. His boots clicked once, then again. And as he passed the same point where he'd first seen the light flicker under the door days earlier, he paused, glanced back. The flicker was gone. No hum, no deception, just stillness. He continued forward, slow and certain, the weight of ceremony gone from his shoulders, but not the weight of duty. Not now, not ever. And as the door behind him shut with a soft finality, he whispered under his breath, she wasn't gone. She was just locked away. Until someone opened the door. Should a royal guard defy orders to protect a legacy the world was never meant to forget? Did Prince William do what the crown should have done long ago? And if you found something like this, hidden in silence, would you walk away or open the door? Let us know what you would have done in the comments below. If you believe Queen Elizabeth's memory should never be rewritten, hit that like button right now. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on so you never miss what really happens behind palace walls. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with someone who still believes the truth deserves to be seen. Our next story is already waiting on your screen. Go watch it now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new video.